Hey guys, happy Saturday. And in keeping in theme with last week's video, we're outside on a walk taking advantage of this beautiful weather. But today's video, the reason why I'm wearing a Sonic shirt is because we got to go fast. So that being said, let's get into it. Hey guys, back in the lab, and we're going to pick up exactly where we left off last week, so let's jump in. Okay, so last week we made a project with Ionic PWA toolkit. We got it up on GitHub, and then we basically got environment set up. So we have a local environment where we'll be doing our local development on our computer, and we have a test environment where we'll be pushing this out to a test server. And we can have as many of these as we want, and we can also replicate this process that we showed in the last video, link description, and we can use that to do anything from copying over configs for Cordova to many other processes. So we'll probably be wiring onto that guy many more times throughout this series. So that being said, we're going to get this guy hooked up to Firebase because our secret project that we're working on here for you guys needs to be able to have people log in and authenticate themselves. So we're going to get Firebase set up here. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is head over to console.firebase.google.com and log in with your Google account. And you will create a new project or use one of your existing ones. And then we're going to head into the project here. And at the top, there's an Add App button. And you're going to click on that. And then you're going to click on the little web or code icon here in the top. And once you click on that, it's going to give you this initialization code. So we can copy this guy out, and then we're going to go into our environments index.local.html, and we're going to paste that right into the head of the document. And this is going to initialize Firebase. And again, we can have a different one of these for our test server versus our local or our live site. So this is, again, another place where we can kind of utilize that. For our cases, for this video, we're going to use the same for both, and that should do it. Okay, cool. So now that we've got that, we can test to see if it is working. So let's go ahead and start our build. So we run npm start, and remember that in last video, we added that extra little command that's gonna copy over our files for our local environment. And so we can test now to see and make sure that we're getting Firebase. If you right click and go to inspect, you might have this message here that's saying, hey, looks like you're using the full Firebase SDK. Did you know we have individual packages for auth, database, etc. So if you're putting this into production, it's probably better to use those those individual packages, and that way you're not pulling in the full weight if you're not using things like storage or the database. Another way we can check is we can just type in Firebase. So there should be in the global scope, there should be a Firebase variable, and that has stuff like our app and auth and all those different things that get included with the Firebase library. So we do have it set up. We're ready to go here. So let's go ahead and wire up a login. So we're seeing the home page here. So let's go ahead and jump into app-home.tsx. And we'll see here's the text for this page. And what we're going to do is we're going to wire up the button here to instead log us in with GitHub. So let's go ahead and just say log in with GitHub. And then what we're going to do is, instead of linking this to an href, we're instead going to okay, cool. So we're instead going to link this up to an on-click. So this is going to be an event. So it's going to use the click on the button. So whenever we click on this guy, we're going to run this.login. And I like to be really explicit, so let's just say login with GitHub. And then up here, we can do this, we can do login with GitHub. Need to get consistent with how I do GitHub. GitHub. Okay, GitHub. Okay, so why is our compiler mad? Why are you mad at us, compiler? I'm sorry, I love you. I think it's just being cranky. Okay, so now we've got our on-click event that's going to run this method up here. Let's go ahead and close this guy. And let's just console log the event for right this second so we can see that in action. And another thing that's interesting to note here is you kind of have two, let's see, on click equals log this event. What am I missing? What am I missing? Event was declared, but event. Okay, so we can use this on-click implementation. We can do this in a couple different ways. We have this traditional way, which is using the fat arrow. So basically, when JSX is rendered, it's not going to keep our scope. Like, it doesn't know when it's rendering this lump of HTML-looking code. It doesn't know what the scope of this is. So we have to pass in that reference in our clicks and stuff like that, so that we get access to our class here. So in another way to do that, if you're not passing through variables, because you can see here we're passing through the event, if you're not passing anything else through other than the event, a shorter way you can write this is you can just say this dot the name of the the name of the method that you're trying to run dot bind and then this, and this is the exact same functionality. We're going to have, why is this so cranky? So we're going to have the same exact results. So it's going to bind this to the click. So you'll see we get the mouse event. So every time we click, it's going to pass through that event. And that is equivalent, again, to just having our fat arrow function and passing the event through that way. So same thing, we get the mouse event through. And we really don't need to do anything with the event in this case. We could prevent default or do something like that. And I'm just going to kind of just leave that unused for right now. Pro tip, if you are not using a variable and you want to keep it there and not have the compiler scream at you in TypeScript, you can just throw an underscore in front of it. So there's your pro tip of the day. So cool. So now we've got this hooked up. We're ready to start to wire up to Firebase for our auth. So let's go ahead and set up the auth inside of the Firebase admin panel. So if we go into the panel here, and then we click on authentication, we can see a list of our authenticated users in our app. And then we can click on the sign-in methods tab to get the list of available sign-in options that we have. And it looks like they've just added a couple more, which is fantastic. I might have to cover that in a future video. If you guys are interested in that, please comment down below and let us know, or shout at us on Twitter, because that's what people do on Twitter nowadays. So cool. So we're going to go into GitHub down here. And then we need two things, and this is how most of them work, because most of these are using OAuth. And OAuth is pretty standard. You have a client ID, which is the ID of your application on the other side that's going to be authenticating. And then you have the secret, which is like what authenticates you. It's like the key that you hand off to this other third-party provider so that they can log in users on your behalf. And then there's a link that we're going to give to the other side, so GitHub in this case. And this is where they're going to redirect the user after they finish login successfully or not. So we're going to copy that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the links for the documentation. So we are now in the docs. So if you want to jump into the description, we also have a link for this guy. And this walks you through the process that we are doing right now. So we're going to add Firebase to your project, register your app, which we've done. Register your app is where we're at. We're doing that right now. So now we're going to click on this link, and it's going to take you into a page on GitHub. You can get here also by doing settings, and then you can go into your organization if you have one, and then you can go into GitHub apps. And then you can see here, we can click on this new GitHub app button, and then this is where we're going to be filling this stuff out. So same as if you click on the link for register your app inside of Firebase docs. So here we go. So this is our application, and this application name is going to be Madness Project. And our homepage URL, we don't really have one at the moment, so we're just going to use the one that they give us for our app. We're just going to use the Firebase PWA. And then we're going to remember to copy this guy over. We're going to copy that guy, and we're going to paste that down here in the authorization callback URL. And so that is going to be where they redirect after they log in. Cool, so we can give a description. This will show up when the user is prompted to log in. So you might put a description of like what you're doing with their data from GitHub and stuff like that. I'm going to update all this stuff later, so we're gonna just create it. Cool, so once it's created, you'll see that you get your client ID and your client secret. So now we can go ahead and copy this client ID and paste it into the, we're gonna enable it first. Now that it is enabled, we will see we can actually type in these fields. Now we can put in our client ID, we can put in our client secret, and then we can click save. And now that is going to say enabled there by GitHub. And you can see I've already done this for Facebook and Google. The process is a little bit different. Google is obviously the easiest because literally you just flip the switch and they've already got all the things that they need to kind of create that wiring for you. Now that we have our GitHub application set up on GitHub side and we've got it wired up to our management panel or the console for Firebase, we are ready to actually start coding the implementation in our project. So first step here, you can see we create a provider. So we're going to do that. And then right off the bat, we're going to get two compiler errors here. One saying that the provider is declared but never used. And then two, that Firebase is not declared or it's not finding Firebase. And that is because we, again, used the script tags. We didn't use the import with Firebase. And so it doesn't have typing. So we can fake out the compiler here by doing declare const Firebase. And that'll create a global variable that it has a typing of any. So we can use this guy down here. And now we should be able to continue on with this. So we're going to do const provider instead of var because this isn't going to change. And then we can skip past these next two steps. These are both optional. So this basically sets up scopes. So with certain OAuth applications, you can send in scope, and this will give you, or this will let them know what pieces of information you need from their application. So in this case, their example has add scope repo. So if we're working with GitHub, we might want to add the ability for us to get repos from that user's accounts. So this would be the way to kind of wire up that kind of functionality. Then we have a custom OAuth provider parameter. So if we wanted to send in some other parameters, like for instance, this will not allow them to sign up if they're brand new to GitHub. We can pass in some other options like that. We don't need any of that. We're going to jump right down to step 4, and we're going to authenticate with Firebase using a pop-up. So we're going to sign in with pop-up. They also have another option that lets you sign in via redirect, but that method takes them to the other website and then redirects them back to your website, which we found creates some hesitation in users when they leave one website and go to another. So the best method we found is the sign in via pop-up. So we'll just copy that code there and paste it down here, and we're going to get lots of green underlines. And this, as you can see, it's just using the Firebase Auth library. Then it's going to sign in with pop-up. We're going to pass in that provider that we created. And then when it's done, it's going to run this function with the results. And if there's any errors, it catches it, and we can handle them down here. So this is fine and dandy, but we are in Stencil. So let's take advantage of Stencil here, and let's use some ES6 awesomeness and put async in front of our method here. And then what we can do is change this into async await. So instead of having this .then function and then getting back the result, we can instead change this to just const result equals await. And now this is going to await for this promise to finish, and then the result is going to be passed back into this variable here. And so now we should be able to say console.log result, and that will console log the result of the login. So now that's a little bit simpler to look at. If we wanted to capture the errors from this, so say there was an error, we can simply wrap this with a standard try catch. And then here we will be able to get the error and do something with it. But again, since this is a basic demo, we're just going to stick with the most basic implementation. So cool. So now we've got Firebase Auth signing in with pop-up, and we should get the result back in the browser. So let's go ahead and check that out. So we're here in the application. We click login. It pops open the pop-up for GitHub. And since I'm already logged in and I've already authenticated, it's going to just automatically close that pop-up and give us back the results. And so here you can see we get the user info from the user, we get the credentials, as well as some other user information. And this user information includes the user information for our system. So you can see here the UID for the user. And if we wanted to check that over in Firebase here, you can see there's my login with GitHub, and there is that same user ID. So we are indeed logged in with GitHub. But Bobby, I hear you say, what if I'm not a fucking noob and I don't want to use script tags in my index page, and I'm not going to implement Firebase that way, and I'm not going to try to hack around my compiler, you fraud. I thought you were a professional. Okay. Criticism warranted. Okay, warranted. So let's do it a different way. So first off, let's go ahead and npm install --save Firebase. And that's going to install the Firebase SDK in our node modules. And that way we can import them via ES6. And what we'll do is up here at the top, instead of declaring const Firebase, where we don't get those typings, we're going to instead do import Firebase from Firebase/app. And then we can import the other libraries as needed. So we can say Firebase-auth, and that's going to import the auth library. And now that we have that, we should get our autocomplete. So if we come down here, we can say Firebase dot, and then you can see it's giving us the autocomplete, and we can see all of the nice docs that they have given us baked right in. So there's that, but we're probably also going to, we're going to have to initialize the code differently. So before we had it inside of our index.html here, and you can see it just simply does a config and then it passes this initialize app. We need to do this now instead of in here. We're going to delete all of that out, and we're going to do that same thing in our test. We don't need any of that scripts or any of the initialization. Now in our app home, we can do a component did load, and when the component loads, we're going to do that config and initialize this app. So now if I save and I refresh over here, or we run our build npm start, now it's going to launch, and again this time it's going to be using the SDK via import rather than using those script tags. So now we should be able to do login with GitHub, and we get the same exact process, except this time we have our typings, we have a happy compiler, we're good to go. So that would be cool enough, right? We've got it working, we're importing, but let's get smarter. Let's get better about this. And this is not generally how I set up my applications. This has a lot of hard baked in Firebase stuff into our actual home controller. And so if we ever want to change the provider that we use to do login or anything like that happens, that creates some problems for us. So I'm going to copy over a little bit of code from one of our other projects, and we're going to create a folder in here under source. We're going to call this services. So this is, they like to call theirs helpers, which I'm not a huge fan of the naming. Yeah, but I'm going to create a folder called services here, and then we're going to create a new file called auth.ts. And this guy is going to be our auth service. So this is going to be a file that we're going to wrap around Firebase. And you see, we're going to do that same thing. We're going to import Firebase from Firebase app. And then we have all these other things up here. These are the Ionic native libraries. So I don't have time to get into this here. But basically, when you log in with Firebase on a regular app, right, or a regular website, you use the web SDK. But when you're logging in on a device, like for instance Cordova or something like that, you have to use Ionic Native or some other native login, and that will use the device's native login process. So for instance, with Google, you get a prompt on an Android phone that logs you in with the native Google UI, and that way the user doesn't have to remember their Google account information when they log in via the browser. With this auth service, we're going to pass in the config, and this is going to run our initialization. So we're going to pass in config .firebase, and we're going to pass in the Firebase config. So to do this, we're gonna do this a little bit differently. So here we're doing it instead of app home. What we want to do is we want to go into app root, where the actual application gets initialized, or like its main starting point, right? We're going to go in here, and let's go ahead and take this component did load stuff, or actually let's just take the config here. Let's copy this out. Let's delete this. and we'll leave that file there for a second. We're going to jump into approot.tsx. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start passing down, initializing and passing down services. So up here, let's import our auth service. So we'll do import auth service, and we'll import auth service from // services /auth. Okay, so now we've got our auth service, and what we need to do is initialize our auth service. So once you see this constructor here, a constructor method runs immediately when we call the new word. So once we say new auth service, we pass in a config, and then it will automatically create the Firebase instance. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say default props. And then we're going to say default props equals, or no, let's give it a typing here. It's going to have auth, and auth is going to be the auth service, an instance of the auth service. And then we're going to say equals, and then we're going to say an object here. And then we're going to say auth, new auth service, and then we're going to pass in the config. What is it giving me? Some kind of an error here. Okay, so I think the typings have changed slightly for this thing. So let me make sure my typings match. API key is a string, API domain, database URL, project ID, storage bucket, message sender ID. Oh, that's because this needs to be passed in. I forgot I named it Firebase. So we are specifically going to be passing through. We have some other config stuff that we might be doing inside of that auth service. So in this case, we are passing in the Firebase config as an object called Firebase. So that makes sense, Bobby. Why didn't you remember that? Okay, so there we go. So now this is going to basically run our auth service, and it's going to set it. It's going to start our auth service, which is going to fire up Firebase with this config, and then it's going to set it to this default props. And then what we can do is in our router, so if you're using Stencil router or using Ion router, either one, we can pass through component props, and we'll set this equal to this.default props. And then what that's going to do is, remember our default props are an array, or sorry, an object, and it's going to include our auth service. So this is basically going to allow us to pass our this.default props. This is going to allow us to pass our props into, or our services into each one of our pages. And note, I will not pass these services into the components that we build. This is just for page level. So we're going to use the router to pass in props to our pages. And now on our page here, we don't have to worry about importing Firebase anymore. We're not going to be doing the login this way, so we're going to do it slightly different. And then up here at the top, we're going to need to use our prop because remember we passed in our root here, we passed into the route where we're loading this component, we passed in the props for that includes the auth service. So now we should be able to get a prop here, and that prop is going to be auth, and it's going to be an instance of auth service, and boom, our VS Code is going to pick up on that and automatically import it. If not, you're going to want to import this guy. And that's just going to be there for typings in this case. So we're just using it for our typings because we're automatically going to get this back because it's being injected via the router. So now let's go ahead and just make sure that this works by doing component did load, and we will console.log our this.auth. And if everything went well, we're now passing that auth service as a prop down here, and then now we can use our auth service inside of our any of our pages here that we're using for the router. And there you can see there's our auth service, there's our config, we've got it, we're ready to roll. So cool. And again, there's some more stuff in that auth service. Feel free to check it out, pretty cool. But let's go ahead and now that we know this works, let's go ahead and run the same thing except with our new auth service. And in our auth service, if we take a look here, there's a little panel that many people don't really pay much attention to. It says outline on VS Code, and you can open this guy up, and this will let you actually search through your methods on your classes and stuff. So you can see here we have all of our different methods that we can see. And we have create user, log in, log out, with email, with link. So what I want to do is I want to do with social. So you can see we've created a with social. We pass in the network we're logging in with, and then we pass in whether we want them to redirect or not. And then it's going to pass us back a promise with the Firebase user in it. So we're gonna do that. So let's go ahead and in our app home here, we'll say const result equals await this dot auth dot login. Oops, with social. So we're gonna auth with social. We're gonna auth for GitHub. And that's it. That's all we need to do. This will be the same result. So we'll do console.log result. Boom. So now we should have the exact same result. So we click on this, same result, except now we're not initializing our app. We're not doing a bunch of hackery inside of our page. Instead, we're initializing this service once, and then we're passing it down into our components. If you found this helpful and it was something that you enjoyed, then you should give it a like, and give it a subscribe, and other things that you can do on YouTube, because y'all know how to do it. All right, so we will be back next week where we will continue this. We're probably going to implement a database and start to get that part of it wired up, and we'll probably use our environment thing to pass these variables in. But my challenge to you, Internet, is we want to see you guys wire up your apps with our auth service and get it wired up via Google and Facebook, and share it with us at Madness Labs. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys.